Mr. Mayor.
Here.
Alderman Blanton.
Here.
Alderman Hanson.
Here.
Alderman Peterson.
Here.
Alderman Berger.
Present.
Alderman Brown.
Present.
Alderman Potts is absent, and Alderman Baggett,
Present.
and the mayor's here too. So the next item on the agenda is citizen comments. I do have some citizen comments, but we will have those whenever we address the issue that they want to talk about in the appropriate order. And I don't think Hannah brought me any more, so we'll continue on to the Development Services Advisory Commission Annual Update. And this is one of those things that all these multiple commissions that we have, I've asked that we periodically get a report from them, let us know what they're working on. So.
Good evening, everybody. As you all know, my name is Catherine Harrelson. I am the Development Services Analyst here at the City of Franklin. And one of my favorite parts of my role is I get to serve as staff liaison for the Development Services Advisory Commission. It's a wonderful group of dedicated people from various areas of the development community. They're really dedicated, and they voluntarily give up their Wednesday mornings at 7:30 a.m. To come and talk with staff and really collaborate on anything process related in development services. And they can make recommendations to you all on any process changes. We're here tonight to give you a report on what we've been up to in the last year. Seated with me is our chair, Dwight Kaiser, and of course, Alderman Matt Brown serves as our alderman representative. And behind me is Michael Walters Young, who also serves as our staff representative for this commission. So without further ado, I need to hand it off to Dwight now to give his report.
Thank you, Catherine, and I will try to make this quick and to the point. I'm here to represent
There we go.
your Development Services Advisory Commission. As pointed out, I am the chair, but I share that with Alan Thompson, who is our co-chair, Matt Bryant. We have several other members from the development community. It's a great eclectic mix of architects, engineers, landscape architects, builders, financiers, real estate people, and that's great in that we have a nice cross-section of the community coming together on that. But I really want to pay homage not only to Catherine and Vernon, but from the staff that has incredibly contributed to this. We've gotten to know everybody a lot better, from building and neighborhood services, from the planning department, from the engineering department, and it kind of goes on and on. We've had robust and continuous conversations on numerous items, and let me just real quickly then go over what we have accomplished in the past year or so. Meetings, we meet every second Wednesday of the month, so anybody that would like to join us in the break room or the training room at 7:30, we'd gladly provide coffee. This year, we've taken on a number of issues requested by either the mayor or coming from you all through staff. We've been reviewing changes to the certificates of use and occupancy and the certificate of completion. This is an ongoing process. We have made recommendations, but it seems like this creeps back into our schedule every couple of meetings, and that's fine. It's not an easy one to solve, and it is something that we take very seriously and try to look at from all angles. We're also analyzing the current surety process. Again, if we want to get into details of that, we'll ask questions at the end, and I'll have Mr. Young answer those questions because he's much better at it than I am. We're also continuing to improve the city's development review process, and this is really where we're meeting with several members of the different departments and trying to put our collective heads together, not only from the review agency side, but from the preparation and professional side, and coming together, and it gives us just a great forum to talk about issues that we may have experienced personally or that we know that might be going on in the community. We've also implemented changes to the swimming pool permit process. A lot of people don't know, but with the influx of new residents we've had over the past 2 or 3 years, it seems like everybody with a pickup truck and a shovel was suddenly a pool contractor. And that has led to issues that we have with getting things done according to the city process, but more importantly, signing off. As in many facets of life, that last 10% is where we're really facing challenges of getting closure to a lot of these permits that have been taken out. Excuse me. Our outlook, we're continuing to look at the certificate of use that will continue to go on. We're also looking at considering incentives for contractors and developers who have no or few reinspection requests. There's a number of inspections that are called out. The city staff takes time to go out. They're not ready. It's an incredible waste of the city's funds and the time, man hours that are appropriated. So if we can create incentives for people to do it right the first time, we believe that it will actually engender a quicker review and hopefully final sign-off in a review process. We're also always continuing to discuss and analyze the current development process. Again, working with the development professionals on the team, as well as staff and invited folks from different aspects of the community. It's just been very, very good. And I want to point out Alderman Brown for his energy that he has brought to this committee that we did not have necessarily represented for. And we are so pleased to have him involved from that standpoint. Quick and dirty, that's it. I'd be glad to take any questions, or I will pass it on to those that might be able to answer the questions you might have.
Before we ask any questions, there are going to be some vacancies. These are
2 years.
the members can, is it 2 years?
3 years.
3
Yeah.
years, but they can have 2 3-year terms.
Yes.
And so we have a couple, 3 people rolling off.
3 people
And,
rolling off.
So if you know of somebody that you think might be a good fit, let Catherine know so they can send a resume.
Yeah, there's a notice up on our website. If you go to the Development Services Advisory Commission link under Boards and Commissions, that notice is already up on the website. We just ask that they submit letters of interest and resumes, and we're accepting applications until the end of the month, so Friday, June 30th.
Go ahead, Alderman Baggett.
This just seems like as good a time as any. You were talking about building permits and what's happening on 3rd Avenue with a structure that was torn down, or most of it, after receiving a disapproval or no approval to do that. I would like for the staff to look into, in conjunction with this committee, something that's fair, but possibly halting the ability to have building permit. If you just disregard our permitting process, some sort of pause in the ability to obtain a permit for a length of time, because and I think that ultimately would flow through your committee for feedback, because we certainly don't want to be unfair to builders, but we need to have some teeth. And I think on the building permit side, for people who choose to flagrantly disregard the Historic Zoning Commission's what they have put forward as appropriate. And so, yep, that was my little 2 cents, because it's fired me up. It's fired a lot of us up because we have to have some teeth. And so I hope your committee will work with staff at the appropriate time to engage on that subject and come up with some creative ideas. And of course, we want to do that collaboratively with the building community, but I'll stop at that. I could keep going, because this is a danger to our city's historic assets if we don't figure that out.
Yeah, just, just to add to that, that is something that we're in the very beginning stages of discussing, and that is something that we do plan to bring forward to the Development Services Advisory Commission.
I appreciate that comment. In times when folks are busy, we seem to see that some folks would rather ask forgiveness after the fact, or are willing to pay the fine because the fine is so small, or whatever. And that's exactly what we need to root out. And I agree with you, and we will take that on, for sure.
I could just add on before I recognize Alderman Blanton, and that I was pretty upset on a couple of projects where they came in with bulldozers and cleared everything, and that wasn't the original plan. And so, I think there ought to be some penalties if you don't follow the rules. And so that's my only comment. Alderman Blanton, then I'll get Alderman Berger.
I don't know if I want to change the subject or not. Dwight, I was trying to tell you the resource page was skipped, and since there's money attached, I didn't know if that was intentional
No,
or.
it was not, and I apologize. I was
noticed
just
that.
trying to get out of here.
No,
So,
ching ching.
Yes, and I will point out that the city has requested $25,000 to survey the local development professionals. Catherine, you add detail to that?
Yeah.
please?
So this was something that we briefly discussed, and I know it's in the budget proposal. This is just to really gather data and assess satisfaction levels from our development community, particularly the ones that do a lot of work in Franklin. We as staff really just want to assess, how are we doing? What are our processes? Are we doing these things efficiently? So that's what this budget allocation or in the proposal is for.
and just piggyback, is that something we're gonna do in-house, or is that to hire someone to do this survey? That seems pretty steep, although I know nothing's cheap anymore.
Yeah, we're in the pretty early processes of having that discussion.
So we could have a
But-
deduct at the end of this whole thing, quite possibly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got Alderman Berger, then you need to say something else, then I'll get you, Alderman Berger.
Go ahead. You want?
No, you
You sure? All right. So a question, I was going to go to that last page as well. You said something about, okay, the request for the development professional survey, will that be anonymous? Did they say?
Yes.
I would want it to be
Yes.
anonymous because
We would-
people
we would
don't
want
feel
that to be
very free
anonymous.
sometimes to be totally upfront if they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'd like that. And then you said on that other page on the Outlook, consider incentives for contractors who have no or few re-inspections. What types of incentives would that be? Can you give an example? You wouldn't bypass an inspection just because they're,
No, but in the development process and even in the permitting stage, we find that the city has found that some contractors / developers understand the process and tend to get it right the first time. And this is after repeated projects, say, within the city. We're looking into, we have not made any decisions on, maybe there's a sped up timeline,
Okay.
the fast flow lane, if you will.
Sure.
That is granted to folks that have a
Yeah.
track record with the city that is doing what is expected of
Like
them
the
and
TS
producing a good product and
Like
project.
the TSA line at the airport?
Could be. That's exactly right.
Frequent flyers?
Now I've gone to global entry, so it, it makes
That's right.
life so much
You got the
easier.
global entry. All right, so, and then the other thing is, talked about increased fines. First of all, I wouldn't want us to willy-nilly say, because somebody forgot to or didn't, well, they overlooked, didn't know, or purposely didn't get a permit. There's all types of reasons.
Yes.
It's not always because they were purposely doing it. But that doesn't mean that if they want to do a project in the future, they couldn't apply and then we blackball them, correct? Because I
That's
wouldn't
not
want
the
them.
intent.
Well, the intent can be one thing, Dwight, and sometimes people will get construed, how that gets construed. So I wouldn't want people to necessarily be blackballed, but we would keep a real hawk eye on them because they need to know the process. And I think they should be required maybe to come in and have an in-person meeting, a specific meeting for people who have not gotten permits in the past, and have a specific meeting for them to say, since there was a problem before, we want to have a special meeting, and we're going to go over all the rules and regulations, and maybe that's what we do with them in the beginning, or something like that, just an idea. And the other thing, something about increased fines for penalties, are we, like, it always seems that we're limited for penalties by the state law.
Right.
So would we be, again, as you said, sometimes the fee is so small, it's like, hey, I'll just pay the fine and be done with it. Is there any chance of upping that fine, or do we need to go maybe to the state legislature and ask for them to increase the fines?
And I think depending on what the specific topic is, yes, there are many that are set by the state.
Sure.
There's a few, I believe, that we have here locally that are worth reconsidering, and perhaps we do need to focus on them. We're still early in that process.
Well-
But some of the fees are so incredibly low
I know.
compared to, quote, the damage that might be done.
Yeah.
Intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, just leave it on. So I would ask that the committee do this, reevaluate that, find out what all those fines are, and see where we really do need to increase the fines, and if so, do they need to be state approved? And if so, bring it to the board and let us go through that, because we should send that to our state legislatures and ask them, especially for historic cities. I think that's where the problem really runs into. We have a lot of historic properties in certain cities in Tennessee that may have the same problem. So I would ask for you, for that group to look at that and bring it to us.
Absolutely, we will.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Alderman Daggett.
She said what I wanted to mention about the anonymity of the survey. I think it's important. And let's try to get, you always get the complainers, but I think getting as much data and allowing all of that to be provided so that we can have a good, fair assessment. I mean, that it helps us in business to get that kind of feedback. I mean, Google reviews is the best thing that has happened to a lot of customer service, and it's unfiltered. So I think that's important for this too. Thanks.
And that's really how this Development Services Advisory Committee originated, was interviews with a lot of different developers and contractors.
We appreciate your support. We look forward to your input and feedback, and please feel free to join us at any of our meetings. We even take field trips on occasion.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask you something?
Sure.
You mentioned that there are some vacancies, or going to be some vacancies?
3 vacancies.
3 coming up.
So, can you just briefly say what you look for someone who's to sit on this commission? Because people are watching at home, and also people here in the audience.
I would say people that are developers, architects, contractors that have an interest in participating in improving our processes, we would welcome their application.
Or in the construction
If you look
trade?
at this particular group, there's many of them that have worked all over the country and have vast experience. Architects, engineers. So
Yeah. Well, I think too, that would be good to look for people that have experience, but, some of the younger people in our community have had 10, 15 years of work experience as well, so, all right, thanks.
Quite a few young ones on there. Dwight's one of them, so.
There you go.
I do enjoy pointing out that both the chair and co-chair are landscape architects. We like to keep it that way.
How about number 2, ordinance 2023-01, an ordinance to amend Title 12, Chapter 1 of the Franklin Municipal Code to amend Section 12-105 relating to certificate of use and occupancy and certificate of completion.
All right, this is a good segue. Earlier, you saw Dwight talking about how Development Services Advisory Commission has really been taking a look at certificates of use and occupancy and how that process has been working. I came before you all about a year ago, kind of just to briefly introduce the concept of what we were trying to do. And since then, we've really gone back for the last 6 months, really, with the Development Services Advisory Commission to really vet this process. And back in May, we received a recommendation from them to you all. So what I want to do is there's 2 big sections, one with new development, one with existing sites, just because certificates of use and occupancy really serve different roles between the 2. But I'll go through our current process, the challenges that come from that process, what we're proposing, and then it'll be open for discussion or questions. And then just to briefly state the purposes and the goals of this, we do want to protect the public health and safety and welfare of individuals in Franklin, ensure that development is done and completed in an efficient and timely manner, and to maintain the high quality of life in this city. So I'll start off with new development, and before I go into what our current process is, I really think it's important to talk about the difference between what a certificate of use and occupancy is and a certificate of completion. They serve 2 different roles. A certificate of use and occupancy is a document that states that this building or site is safe to occupy. It is up to standards as far as the building code, and the use is permitted by the zoning ordinance. A certificate of completion is different in that it does not authorize any kind of occupancy. It's just simply a document stating that a building or a site is complete. So what do we currently do? What's our current process? Currently, any new construction needs a certificate of use and occupancy to occupy the space. And the way that we currently issue them is whenever the building is completed, all the inspections are done and approved, fire, zoning, we will often issue a final certificate of use and occupancy. And we have to make sure that the site is stabilized and functional as well. But the rest of the site work is usually covered under performance agreements and sureties. And this has caused some challenges in the last few years. The biggest one is when we issue CUOs right now, a lot of the site work is not completed. We ask that it's stabilized and functional and we maintain that, but what it's always been is sureties are the incentive to complete the site work. Well, in the last few years, we've kind of realized that the sureties are no longer really an incentive. We're finding that we're having sureties linger for sometimes years at a time. We have some that are almost a decade old. And right now, we have about $78 million in open letters of credit and site work that has not been completed in Franklin. And that's a problem, especially with inflation the way that it is. Staff is growing concerned that the lingering sureties, if we had to call those letters of credit and do the work ourselves, we're worried that it's not going to cover the cost of actually doing the site work. So what we're recommending is that we change the timing in which a final certificate of use and occupancy is issued. So currently, it's whenever the building is completed, but what we're recommending is that it is issued whenever the building and all of the site work is completed. So all of the performance agreements have been done and they've moved to maintenance obligations. But we don't want to delay people from moving into buildings or homes. So what we have recommended, and it fits differently depending on the type of development, but what we're recommending, for example, is single site non-residential, where it's one tenant one building, one site. What we are recommending is whenever the building is completed, all the inspections are done on the building and approved, the site is stabilized, we will issue a temporary certificate of use and occupancy for that building or for that site. So if an example is like EMF, they can move into that space and occupy it under a temporary. And then that temporary gets renewed every 30 days. As of right now, we're not charging a fee for that temporary. And then once that site work is completed, all the performance sureties have moved to maintenance obligations, a final certificate of use and occupancy would be issued for that entire site. So we're not trying to delay anyone from moving in, but we also want to get the site work done.
Can they perform, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you speak to that? Can they perform the duties that they need to do in that facility or that?
Yes. So, like I said, the building would need to be completed and the site would have to be completely, like, they would have to be functional. People should be able to go in and out and be able to occupy that space safely. Meanwhile, and a lot of this site work that needs to be completed, a lot of it's like the top coat of a road, it's landscaping, things like that, that we're just trying to incentivize to get completed in a timely manner. And this will work differently with residential, with like single-family neighborhoods. The way we permit single-family is by section. So say you get a section of 20 homes. So what we would do in that situation is whenever the homes are done, site is stabilized, a temporary certificate of completion would be issued on the section. And then whenever the homes are ready to be sold, we would issue final certificates of use and occupancy for those individual homes. So families can move in, there's no issues with that. And then the contractor, though, is still on the hook because there's a temporary certificate of completion that renews again every 30 days. And it's a reminder to them that their work is not done. And then as they move along in the development, when the proportionate amount of site work is completed on that section, we would issue them a final certificate of completion. And that process would repeat until they're done with the whole subdivision. And then finally, with multi-tenant developments, if you think like a strip mall that has one building and multiple suites or tenants, this would function kind of similar, where when the shell building is done and site stabilized, issue a temporary certificate of completion on the shell building and the site. And then we can issue final certificates of use and occupancy as the tenants build out their individual spaces. So again, we're not trying to delay anybody from moving in and operating their business, but that temporary certificate of completion reminds the contractor that the work is not done. And this is just a visual to try and help kind of show what I mean, the difference between a CUO and a COC. So you see the certificate of completion is for sections or for sites, and the individual certificates of use and occupancy for the individual homes or for the individual tenant spaces. The only time a certificate of completion is not in the picture is when it's a single tenant in a single site. Before I move on to existing sites, do you all have any questions?
Yeah, so one, I'm sorry, Mayor. Is that our,
Go ahead.
so I lived in Lyde Park for a bit, and I guess our section was finished and we were able to close on it. But the street, the top coat was not on the street for a year. So in that situation, this is where my head went was, and I don't know that, and maybe as a realtor you might know, that can you close on a home with a temporary CO?
Yes. And there again, the certificate of completion, that's where we're talking about the new idea of the certificate of completion for the residential section. And so what that particular section of the neighborhood would have been, since the infrastructure street was in place and functional for use, but not finalized, that would have been a temporary certificate of completion that would allow us to issue the individual building permits. And so the contractor on the houses will still get a final certificate of occupancy for the individual dwelling unit, while, and in some cases, we're talking about different contractors also. You have the home contractor who's different
Yeah,
from the site contractor. So your home contractor is still free to get the certificate of occupancy for his building. Meanwhile, the site contractor is still under a temporary certificate of completion for the infrastructure for the site.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Alderman Hanson.
And
then
to
I'll get Alderman
Patrick,
White.
Alderman Baggett's question, which was awesome, is there at any point a revocation of that certificate of occupancy based on the developer's performance, once it's been issued to an occupant?
So are you talking about, Alderman Hanson, a section of a single-family dwelling neighborhood?
Well, let's talk about a multi-unit commercial building. So let's say you go ahead and you issue a certificate of occupancy, the ice cream store moves in, the builder, for whatever reason, goes belly up, can't finish his portion to get the certificate of completion. Is there at any point, like barring any bank loans or anything, but the relationship with the city that would negate that certificate of occupancy and eject that tenant?
Not when the developer is responsible for a multi-tenant or a multi-building development. Now, one of the things that Catherine pointed out, and I hope you're gleaning onto, is that presently, we're not proposing to charge for a temporary CO, meaning every 30 days. And there are some communities that once the temporary certificate of occupancy or completion is given, they may charge $500 up to $1,000 for every 30 days to incentivize getting the project fully complete and the performance maintenance or the performance sureties moved to maintenance. And that's going to be a conversation that will be forthcoming in the future, and we'll work with the Development Services Advisory Commission. But this is the first step in setting up the framework so that we can track temporary certificates of occupancy and completion. However, if you have a builder that's building a single site and a tenant, they're a owner of a business, say a bank building, and they would be party to that temporary CO, and if they don't comply, then there's a risk of losing their CO. That's the leverage that you have when you have a single site and a single entity that's responsible for that.
And I'm not referencing a single entity. I'm talking about innocent people that move,
Right.
multiple people that move into a new building who could be subject to a builder that doesn't complete what they're supposed to. So I want to make sure that those innocent tenants and occupants are protected under this program. And I'm assuming that's what the surety is for.
Yes, and that's why that we want to, and this is part of the continuation of this dialogue, is that we want to be more timely with perhaps approaching the Planning Commission to call sureties if a developer is not completing the site improvements. And you've all heard that there's the landscaping in a lot of residential subdivisions just doesn't get completed. But the final lift of pavement doesn't get put on the road, and property owners are driving over raised sewer caps and inlets, or children are riding a bike. Those are the things that, as Catherine mentioned, that we have data for, have been lingering for 3, 5, 10 years in some cases. And with inflation, we've got to get our arms around this, and that's the ultimate goal. This is the first step in setting up the framework that allows our team to track temporary COs instead of trying to track performance sureties and work that's not yet done.
Oh, well, one more thing, and I would say if you're going to do this, make the temporary CO easier, their ability to get that sooner than they would now get a regular CO. So does that make sense? Let's give them a carrot, because if they get, and I'd be happy to charge for the temporary CO, but a builder should, if they can get a temporary CO 3 months before under our current program, they would have gotten a CO. I'm just saying, I mean, if it's landscaping or some sort of stormwater small fix, that like get them a temporary CO, and they can start earning revenue, and then maybe they pay a fine if they don't do the finish out. But the temporary CO, I would think you'd want that to be further up in I mean, no? Sooner?
No, if I may, our responsiveness today is when a building can be safely occupied by the employees and customers, And the site is stabilized, the stormwater is working. It doesn't have to be landscaped, but the site's stabilized and can be safely occupied. We're issuing a final CO now, and we'll issue the temporary. That really doesn't change. It's just the terminology of a temporary to a final. But we'll track that temporary, and we'll start acquiring data on people that are completing their work and send reminders to hopefully get them off the performance sureties and reduce that currently about $78 million in letters of credit, much lower than where it should be.
Alderman Blanton.
So, question, how do we mirror other cities with this policy or procedure? And how are we going to educate people on this change of procedure? You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
And what are third question, you got them all, Vernon? Is what are the semantics or processes every 30 days? Is that where they come to us? Are we going to them? And is it going to require more staff for something that we're not charging a fee for?
All right, I'm
Got
going to
all-
answer those questions in reverse.
Okay.
If all right. So, with technology, what we have, we will be able to run reports and notify people when their CO is expiring. If at some point in time in the future we put a fee to it, it'll become even
There'll
more
be a pay here attached to that. Okay.
Self-policing. So we don't anticipate any additional staff. We're actually expending too much staff time making re-inspections multiple times on the performance sureties because the work's not getting completed. So the staff doesn't, additional staff doesn't come into play. Secondly, we're not going to charge a fee. We want to educate and engage. We've already started these conversations and see how much progress we can make. The intent in any of our development services, and Matt and Dwight can attest to it, our goal is to cater our services towards those that do things well. And you'll hear in the future that we have those that don't do things quite so well, and that's okay, but we'll work with them, but we've got to make sure our services are meeting the needs of those that do things well. So that's question 2. The first question, where do we stack up against other communities and jurisdictions? I regret that you asked that question, but I'm going to be
Sorry.
really
That's why you
truthful.
saved it to laugh.
I came here 16 half years ago and was blessed, and this process is pervasive across a lot of jurisdictions in different parts of the country. If you were to ask me the question, what would I wish I would have done when I first came here, is implemented a process like this so we wouldn't be in a position now where we have performance sureties lingering out there for 5 to 10 years.
I've got Alderman Berger, then I'll go back to Alderman Baggett. And we do want
right.
to get to number 3
Okay.
tonight.
I'll be quick. Tom, you and I just talked about something recently. How does the situation I called you about, where the developer is not finishing out the stuff that he wants done, and the people are living in the community and they're getting tired of it, and how does this play out? How does this process going to help them again?
It's really brings several of those outstanding issues in under the one umbrella of the certificate of completion, and that's the residential neighborhood situation that we were talking about. If we get more focus on the developer for that certificate of completion and put teeth behind it at some point, and we're talking about actual completion of the development, not just functionality and enough to get started on building, but actually finishing, that's one of the things we're hoping to do.
Well, one of the things with this landscaping issue, streets, but especially landscaping, I think is, first of all, we don't want to require them to put anything in unless it's fall or winter. Because spring and summer is just they're gonna die. So we have to make sure that that's in our regs to make sure that we don't require them. And I think we already have that, don't we? Okay. Then the other thing that was concerned is that there is, in the situation I was talking to you about last week, there is if an HOA takes over, if the residents in that community take over their HOA, because it's at a certain point when the developer is at 75, 95% done or whatever it is. If they're not completed and that surety is not pulled, they get holding the bag. And I think this is where they are in that community, what we were talking about. And so is there anything that we can put in here that requires the developer and the builder to let the resident HOA that takes over the dates and times where they are coming before before the board, planning commission, to get released to that surety? Because a lot of times they'll put it back off again, and the residents don't want to have it put it back off. They want it done, and they want it done now. So if they could come and speak, because I will tell you, in 2006 or 7, I think it was, no, maybe it was 7, I came in here and spoke because they were going to release a bond. They were actually going to release a bond, not continue holding it, on a development that had already met the city regulations, but it was horrible. And the residents were looking at a loading dock from their dining room, living room, and family room windows. And so I spoke against it, and I said, even though they've met the regs, there's a problem here, people, and we've got to work this out. So they delayed it, and I remember walking out the door at the developer, and he was so mad. But the thing is, I was able, and this is another thing, I was able to work, it's the alderman's job to do this. I was able to work with them, and they ended up with their company putting $18,000 more of vegetation in there, and everybody went home happy. And now today you can't even see that loading dock. So there's just some problems that I'm not sure are addressed in this. And you know where I'm coming from with this. So can you take a look at those things and see? Because I think we have to make sure that also that they are alerting the newly taken over HOA to where they are in all this, because sometimes they get left holding the bag. You know what I mean? Do you understand what this is?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the topics, as mentioned in the Development
Right.
Services Advisory Commission discussion, looking at the release of sureties for residential neighborhoods and
But letting the
amounts and so on.
HOAs, the new
Right.
HOAs.
That's part of that whole process.
Who
correct.
take over, there should be something written in there that is mandatory, that they have to let them know. Because if not, they're like, huh? We didn't know. And I don't want that to happen to those people.
We haven't even finished the presentation, so we need to move on if we could. Can you hold your question a few more minutes?
Okay. Now we're going to shift gears to existing sites. And this is a very different process from new development. Currently in our municipal code, the only time a new certificate of use and occupancy is required for an existing site is when the occupancy class changes, which is associated with the building code, or the use of the building or site changes, which is related to the zoning ordinance. And this presents a lot of challenges as well. The biggest one being this just does not accurately capture the changes that are happening to our sites, to our commercial sites across the city. And it's not, we don't really have a predictable process for a new certificate of use and occupancy when it comes to existing sites. Oftentimes what we'll find is whenever inspectors will come in for, say, a renovation inspection, or maybe we get a call for a new certificate of use and occupancy inspection, inspectors will come in, find changes that might have occurred without permits. There might be other building code violations, or sometimes we end up finding out that the use is not permitted by the zoning ordinance. And that's a really hard conversation to have when a business has already moved in and started operating. And so what we're wanting to do, and what our current municipal code doesn't really allow, is we want to establish a very standardized process where we can be proactive in having these conversations with business owners about their vision. What do they want to do with this site that they're potentially looking at before they even sign a lease or before they begin operating? We want to be able to support them in their vision and what they can do in our community. And having those conversations after moving in is really difficult to have. And I want to show you an example. This is a severe example. How this goes is the business owner for this restaurant contacted the Building and Neighborhood Services Department to do a certificate of use and occupancy inspection. Under our current municipal code, this situation did not trigger a new CO requirement. It was a restaurant previously, the tenant had moved out, and this new restaurant tenant moved in, so there was no change in use. They actually called us because their insurance required a new CO. And when we did the walkthrough, we found quite a few building code violations and even some health code violations. If you can look at the pictures, the ones on the far left and the far right, that is grease covering the walls, the electric board, and the ceiling. In fact, the ceiling is actually supposed to be white tile, like this ceiling. And you can see in the middle picture is a bucket of raw chicken and fish on the floor. And this was a business owner trying to be proactive in something that we don't even currently require him to do. And in that situation, we came out, we did a complimentary inspection. Our policy is from the first call, we are in within 48 hours doing the inspection. Our current policy is we provide a punch list of improvements that need to be done in order to bring a site up to code or to be in compliance with the zoning ordinance. The business owner was very cooperative. We worked well with them. I believe they closed shop for about a week to do these improvements, and we're back up and operating. And now everything in that restaurant is up to code, and everything has been addressed. Yeah. But I do want to say that this is a severe example. This is not common. A lot of times when we do a certificate of use and occupancy inspection, a lot of the improvements that need to be made are more related to small things like exit signs or egress. That's much more of the common conversations. But we do have some issues in relation to zoning. And that's a whole other complication. So what we're recommending is adding 3 new requirements to when a certificate of use and occupancy is needed on an existing site. That is when a new business license is issued, we feel as though this is a pretty natural beginning of the process. If somebody comes into revenue management and applies for a business license, they can then be directed to B&S and also get and apply for a certificate of use and occupancy inspection. Another one was a parcel of land being utilized for a commercial or business purpose. We saw this come up a lot around the pandemic, things like a drive-in movie theater or maybe itinerant merchants or mobile food vendors occupying in just a parcel of property that doesn't necessarily have a building or structure associated with it. And the reason why we would want a certificate of use and occupancy in this regard is really for zoning purposes, to make sure the use fits with the parcel of property and how it fits in our zoning ordinance. And then lastly, when there's a change in non-residential building tenant or occupant, and that would be the case with the restaurant, when there's a change in tenant but not necessarily a change in use. And what would happen is a property owner would just need to fill out an application online. It's a 1-page application. Pretty much if you know your name, your business's name, and the address, you're good to go. We make a complimentary inspection within 48 hours of that call or that application being made, and staff always provides a list of what we can do or what renovations need to be made to support the proposed use or occupancy. We always want to work with the business owner. We never want to shut someone down, especially if there's not a life safety issue with that. We always just work through the process with them. But what we really want to do is not run into that situation where we're having that conversation with them after they've already opened their business. We really want to have that educational we want to really have that education with them on the front end. Sometimes even before they even try and sign a lease, we want to have that conversation with them. And just a timeline of where we could see this going. As I said earlier, we've been working several months with the Development Services Advisory Commission on this topic. Tonight, I am presenting you all of the work session. What we're hoping is to maybe get it to voting sometime this summer, and we're targeting an implementation date of about January 1st. We really want to take that time to engage with both the development and the business community to really make sure we get the message out and we really have an open and transparent conversation with them all, because this is a big change. But with that is the end of my presentation. Any other questions?
Question, Alderman Hanson.
Two quick questions. So as you know, we have a lot of people working from home that get a business license. They certainly shouldn't fall under this, correct?
Well, it depends. So it just depends on the building that they're occupying. I mean, if it's just like
It's their home.
if it's their home,
A
that's
home- Based business.
Home occupations are clear. Single
Yes.
family
Okay,
house,
so
home
no
occupation.
home
yeah.
occupations.
No.
Okay, that's a huge question. And then what fines do we have in place? If you go out to this restaurant and this is in disarray, what fines follow
Well, some of
that
those
process?
things, there again, we are not health code enforcement, so that falls under someone else. If we find a business occupying a space without a certificate of occupancy that is required, there again, we would issue the notice violation, cite them to our municipal court. Then each day that they occupy that space without the required certificate of occupancy is a violation of the municipal code or the zoning ordinance, with a fine of up to $50 per day for, exactly. So that question came up earlier, or that discussion point, but that's what we have right now. If they're occupying a space without a permit, and there again, that is a decision of the judge. If they are found guilty of, then up to $50 per day for the violation.
Alderman Bagg.
You have a non-conforming use in zoning use, and changes the tenant changes into another non-conforming use, which it can do because if it does within 3 years, still have to trigger this. It triggers a CO inspection. Does that have any impact on the non-conforming use
No, and
ability
actually,
for the non-conforming?
no, and
use
actually, it's a good thing to get that documented so we can track that. They're getting the information systems we have to continue to be able to track that
Yeah.
of the dates that.
'Cause that's important because we've got a lot of businesses operating in non-conforming uses, especially in the downtown area, just because of just the organic nature of how things have operated down here. So that's important. The second thing, I mean, I feel like there's a whole lot of layers to this, and there is. I know that the spirit of why we're doing this is I agree. I'll say I agree with the intention of this. I'm very, hesitant. Not hesitant. I'm very cautious about unintended consequences, and I know you all are as well because y'all are the first line of those issues when they come in. So as we look at this moving forward, I don't know if there's a way for us to, model this over business licenses that that have been issued over the last year or two, and kind of model maybe what would have, just kind of see. I don't know what data and kind of ability to do that. I don't want to take up too much time doing that, but it is big enough. It is a big enough situation where if we get this wrong, we could jeopardize the businesses, their existence, because not every business can take a couple of months to get in X hundred of thousands of dollars possibly. Like, I imagine this was not a cheap fix for this restaurant. And so I just want us to be really careful, to protect that interest. I'm on board with it, with the way where this is going, but I'm a little bit hesitant.
Your points are well taken, and I would echo something that a really tough conversation is when a business is not coming to us, that's typical in other communities, and they start operating and maybe the property's not zoned. Or there are some serious life safety violations, and then we're causing that conversation to occur, and that's not an inevitable position to be in. So we're trying to set up the framework that makes coming in, making the application. We have been offering complimentary inspections for existing business owners for years. And all they need to do is make a call, and we'll send a team of inspectors over to talk to them, their builder and their architect, about the vision that they want for this space. And it reduces surprises so much for us and for the person making the investment. And that is the goal. As we grow as a community, just imagine doubling in size, having more commercial businesses. Having them go unchecked year after year after year does not improve the current environment that we work in. And those types of situations will continue to arise. Again, this isn't something that the city of Franklin is making up. It's something that the city of Franklin hopefully is finally deciding to put in place to make sure we're growing the community appropriately. The example Catherine gave, yeah, there's other examples, not as bad, but some people locking the doors or putting bars across exit doors in the rear of buildings and not having restrooms properly furnished. There's a myriad of cases. Fire sprinkler systems that are not working. I know Andy is sitting behind us and he could share many, many, many stories. But we want to try to do what's right for the property owner because let's face it, and you've heard it before, the people that buy homes here, the businesses that invest in our community build the community. We're trying to help them make their investment add value to the quality of life we all enjoy.
Quickly.
One
Please.
question. When somebody takes and rents out their place to another entity, so they're getting a new lease, is there anything that tells them before those people sign that new lease that they should come to the city? Sometimes they don't know to do that. How do we help them know to do that?
Well, talking to building managers, commercial building managers, working with the Board of Realtors, they can get that message out for us, plus through our social media channels. Over time, this will become normal because insurance companies and businesses that have legal representation know that they need a certificate of occupancy, and that is a initial part of a business doing their due diligence.
We should do everything we can to make that message get out there because I think that would be helpful.
Good discussion. Item 3, City of Franklin 2023 Employment Engagement Survey.
All right. We recently shared with you results of our citizen survey. And it's something we've done over the last 11, 12 years where we ask our citizens how we're doing and we gain that feedback and we learn from it and we adjust our operations to hopefully continually improve them. But we said we want to do the same thing with our employees. Ask them how we're doing, gain feedback, and the better we serve our city team, the better our team will serve the community, is the philosophy. And so it's that power, and Alderman Baggett actually referred to it a little bit earlier, of gaining feedback and acting upon that feedback. And so we embarked on using an employee engagement survey, a tool used nationally with many, many employers of all different types to get that feedback from our team. And the first time we're doing something like this, I want to introduce you to Jamie Ewald. Jamie is our our organizational development specialist. She came to us about a year ago, first as an management fellow and then into this role, which helps support our team in developing and supporting our team members. So Jamie's going to help lead us, walking through the results that we received and give you that information. And take it away, Jamie.
Thank you. As Eric mentioned, we launched our first employee engagement survey this year, and I've been working on it for the past several months, so I'm happy to be able to present the results tonight. So we launched the survey in February. It was open for 2 weeks, and of our 750 employees that were employed at the time, 92% responded. That was especially important to us to have a high response rate because we wanted to make sure that the data that we collected was representative of the entire workforce and not just certain departments. So most of our departments had at least a 90% response rate. The lowest was 75%. So with that response, we feel really positive and confident in the information that we collected. We used Energage, which is a third-party survey provider. As Eric mentioned, they work with organizations across the country for over 15 years. One of the reasons that we wanted to use a third-party provider was because it provides a level of confidentiality for our staff. And we wanted to make sure that they felt confident that they could give honest feedback and So Energage actually measures that with a reliability question. They ask if respondents felt pressure to respond positively or not, and we did well on that question, so our staff felt confident and comfortable. The survey measures overall employee engagement, and I'll tell you more about how we define that on the next slide, but I also want to mention about Energage. The charts that you're going to see in this presentation were all downloaded directly from Energage. We didn't create the charts ourselves. And the survey overall included 32 questions, which were on a 7-point Likert scale. So staff were asked to measure their or respond with their level of agreement. So a 0 would be strongly disagree with the statement, all the way up to a 6, which was strongly agree. Energage also, and I'll also mention at the end of the survey, staff were given the ability to offer open-ended comments as well. Energage also administers the Top Workplace program, which is used across the nation and is run by newspapers in major markets. That includes the Tennessean, but also newspapers such as the Chicago Tribune and the Washington Post. In Middle Tennessee last year, there were about 150 organizations that participated, and there was representation in all 3 sectors of public, private, and nonprofit. So we are defining employee engagement using Energage's definition, which is a positive psychological state where people feel an emotional commitment to the organization. That would include the organization's goals, our teammates, and our citizens in our case. Another way to say that would be engaged employees are involved in and enthusiastic about their workplace. The reason that we care about that is because there are many, many studies that show when organizations have higher engagement, they see better productivity, improved performance, and happier, healthier employees. We are all probably familiar with the term organizational culture. That's what we do and how we do it. The way that we measure the health of our culture is through employee engagement. So the survey measures the factors that impact engagement the most. So the questions, they are indicators that show us if we are creating or maintaining conditions that are needed for people to work at their very best. In other words, do we have the right policies, practices, and mindsets to achieve our goals? And do we do that in a way that aligns with our core values? Unemployment, the most recent numbers were just released. Unemployment in Franklin is 1.9%. That's also true for Williamson County, compared to 2.6% in Tennessee and 3.1% in the US. So people can really choose to work anywhere that they would like, and we want the city of Franklin to be an employer of choice to attract, retain, and develop top talent. And then that talent goes on to serve the community in the highest level.
So from a leadership perspective, this is really important. Frank, high-performing organization. We do a lot of things very well. But there's a difference in doing it very well and doing it at an excellent or a great level. And I really think engagement is a key way to get there. You see this chart, this is some work Deloitte did on culture and engagement. And it's really interesting. It shows 9 out of 10 CEOs say culture is really important. Engagement is important. But only 12%, almost the inverse of that, 12% really feel like they have a handle on that, that they know where their culture is. And then you take that to only about 46% are prepared to really engage in the work. So we as a city want to be in that group that works at it, understands it, and builds it as a strength. And it's really a difference maker. We talked about being a high performance organization that moves above and beyond that. The analogy I draw is sort of an athlete that is, maybe great in high school, gets a scholarship, ends up going to college and, achieves a high level there as well, say a track athlete or a swimmer, and they're NCAA champion. Well, it's even harder to get to the Olympic team and even harder to get to the medal podium. So this is where you make that jump from being really good, competitive, to being outstanding. And engagement is I think, a secret to doing that. And we want to be an organization that values and focuses on engaging our team with the key of taking our team and our service to the community to a next level.
So I'm going to show you the charts of our city results in a moment, but as a point of context, I wanted to share a little bit about national averages. So Gallup does a poll every year, and they released their most recent data in January, which showed that 32% of U.S. employees are considered engaged, 50% are neutral, and 18% are actively disengaged. And this chart shows how that has varied since 2000. So if 32% of U.S. employees are considered engaged, our question was, how does that look for the city of Franklin specifically? And that is the answer. So 67% of our staff would be considered engaged based on the feedback that they themselves gave. So what that shows is when we say we are a high-performing city, that's true for our external results, but also our internal results, and that we're not only a best place to live, but also a best place to work. But at the same time, we have 18% disengagement, which is right on par with the national average. And that shows that we do have some work to do and some places that we need to examine and do some work on. And so we're committed to doing that over the next several years. I also wanted to mention this slide says that the benchmark average that we're going to use, and you'll see in the subsequent slides, is 64%. That is different than that 32% national average because this benchmark is based on other local governments specifically that use this exact same survey within the past year. That's a group of about 50 municipalities. That percentage is also higher than the national average because this survey takes time and money to administer. And so if an organization is making that kind of investment, very likely they're also high performing. But those are our peer cities, and those are the people that we really want to compare ourselves against. So with that, I will jump into the statements on the survey. So this is the first group of statements. The statements are grouped by theme, so there are 2 slides under the culture drivers theme. I won't go into every statement, but if you have any questions, please do let me know. So again, employees were asked to rate their level of agreement with each statement on a scale of 0 to 6, 0 being strongly disagree with the statement, 6 being strongly agree. And I just want to point out that on these charts, the graphs start at 3, which is neutral. So it is not starting at 0, it's starting at the neutral point. These charts are also organized in relation to the benchmark in our score against other local governments. So our overall highest score is not necessarily at the top. The top score is our top scoring statement against the benchmark. And you'll see those numbers on the end of each bar chart turn red or green if we're more than 5% above or below benchmark. On this slide, I will mention that my job makes me feel like I'm part of something meaningful was our second highest score in the city overall. And also the city operates by strong values, and I believe the city is going in the right direction, also scored particularly high. So on this next slide of culture drivers, my supervisor cares about my concerns. That was a particularly high statement overall in the survey. But you can see at the bottom, meetings make good use of my time. We scored lower than benchmark, and I will mention that is the lowest scoring statement in the city. The second lowest scoring statement in the city is also on this slide. It is there is good interdepartmental cooperation. So this slide is what we call the heat map. It's the same questions that you saw previously. However, averages can kind of hide the full story. So this chart breaks out the different responses that we received. So the more strongly green is the more strongly agree, moving into the more strongly red, which is the more strongly disagree. So you can see on this slide, and I'll tell you on all of the slides like this, there is dark green and dark red. So on every statement, there were polar end responses. There was no exception to that. With 750 people, it's no surprise that there is a wide variety of opinions and experiences, but you can see the challenge that presents as well. Sometimes we look at what we call the percent favorable. That would be what percent of our staff agree in some way with any statement. So that would be anything in any shade of green. It does not include neutral, which is yellow, and it does not include red. So we are often concerned with how much of our staff agrees with a particular statement. And this chart shows that to us. This is the same statements we saw earlier, but the second slide. And you can see towards the bottom, interdepartmental cooperation and meetings, which scored lower using the average scale. Also on the bottom here, where there's less green, but more yellow and red. So those are areas we do intend to focus on. So the next set of statements is what's called the basics. It's pay and benefits. I will mention the survey company was surprised to see that we scored 12% above benchmark on the question or the statement, my pay is fair for the work I do. That isn't one of our highest scoring statements using the average score, but it is our highest scoring statement against benchmark. So we believe that's in large part due to the compensation updates that this board approved. And we see it showing up there.
The other one that's on there that I think is interesting is the second one, where it shows the training also ranking pretty high overall, but also 8% above the benchmark there. So that's a real positive in that we're providing support and developing folks. One of the things we always say, if you have the work ethic and the desire to serve, we'll get you the job-specific skills. We have confidence in our ability to train and develop folks, and this seems to support it, is at least consistent with that approach.
So then here's the heat map chart for those same statements. So you can see the variance in responses. And next, these are what are labeled custom statements. Again, these charts are downloaded directly from the survey provider. I think custom is a little bit of a misnomer. They're really optional statements. We had the choice whether or not we wanted to include them. We were interested in what the responses would be, so we did. But because they're optional, not all of the organizations in the benchmark chose to include them, and that's why you don't see benchmark data on this. I will point out the top statement, my team works well together. That's approaching, on average, 5 agree. That is our top scoring statement in the city. There at the bottom, employees are recognized when they perform well, and the city fosters a culture of accountability. Those were 2 of our lower scoring statements. Those will also become a focus area, and we'll share more about that in a moment. And again, here's the heat map for that same group of statements. So my team works well together. When viewing it in that percent favorable scale, it was 87% favorable. So 87% of our staff would slightly agree, or strongly agree with that statement. And this is the last set of charts like this. So these are the engagement questions. In many ways, they are summary statements of what we saw earlier. And again, the blue line is City of Franklin, and the gray line is the benchmark. And then here is the heat map for those same questions. So I'll point out that 76% of our staff would agree with the statement. I would highly recommend working at the City of Franklin to others. And that is compared to 71% of, which is our benchmark, which is other high-performing local governments. So this slide shows how survey responses broke out across program area. You can see that there is a gap between the highest and between program areas and the highest and lowest. Intergage, I will mention, did say that this breakout is fairly typical for municipalities where public safety and public works tend to be the lower scoring program areas. However, that does stand out to us, and it is an area that we'd like to address.
So, yeah, this is an area that's really important to look at. There are different experiences for different folks across the organization. And as we talk about sort of the movement forward, we'll drill into that a little more specific for you. But it's really important to look at that. Overall, still positive, even on the ones that scored lower, and close to double or at least well above the national average. So we're still coming from a relative strength. And just because everybody else scores lower in those areas doesn't mean we can't break that norm and score even better. And those are the areas for the greatest opportunity to improve and to build that engagement score overall. So there are certain characteristics, I think, that you look at that are common within public safety and some elements of public works that are just different than folks who work at City Hall. And so we have to look at how we work with that and have better engagement in those environments compared to what maybe others are experiencing. So that's part of the challenge, but part of the opportunity as we move forward. All right, so this one's the question that was asked about me. It's a common question of the leader of the organization, the CEO, depending on the nature and the structure. And it asks about confidence in that individual. And you'll see, and this is a graph they gave us. It's different than any other graph we got, but it's the way it is. And you'll see the score for the city of Franklin is right in that benchmark area, a little bit to the positive side of that. And it is an opportunity, again, to build on that as well. I'll say one of the key parts of leadership, in my view, is a key element is that connection to your team and that care for your team. And I'm committed to continue to work on that. It is like some of those results in the slide you just saw. It varies pretty significantly across some departments. And so I'm committed to working specifically on those areas where it wasn't as strong and to build and work on that. And I'm honestly very grateful for the feedback. And so it's something to continue to work on and something we're going to be intentional about in those discussions. And again, how you connect and build, especially in some of those different work environments that may be different from the day-to-day at City Hall.
Okay, so just to recap, these are our top and bottom statements using the average scale. I will mention that the top two are pretty strongly the top two in each category. Once you start getting down to 4 or 5, sometimes the difference is minuscule. So we look at the averages. We're also looking at the heat map and that percent favorable. And we also look at our results compared to benchmark. And so all of that together gives us a pretty holistic view. A couple other top statements would be, I would highly recommend working at the city and I get the formal training I want. And a couple, or at least the next bottom statement is the city fosters a culture of accountability. Another thing that we looked at was how consistent the results of a particular statement were across different departments. As Eric mentioned, the experience and the context of different departments, it looks quite a bit different. So we wanted to see, were there certain statements that were very consistent across the whole city, or were they particular areas of strength or weakness in certain areas? And then that would inform our response to the results. So one of the other statements or questions that were asked of employees was, what 3 words describe the culture at the City of Franklin? This was a fill in the blank question. They could choose any 3 words they wanted, but they had to choose 3 words. And so this is a visual representation of their answers. The larger the word, the more commonly it was used. The red words generally came from employees who are more disengaged. So in other words, employees who scored the survey statements lower. Green came from employees, generally speaking, who were more engaged or who scored the survey statements higher. And gray would be a mix of both, or employees who were somewhat neutral. The words that are highlighted in blue are our core values. So 4 of our 5 core values did make it into our culture cloud. And so the big question then is, we have all of this great data and information. What are we going to do about it? This slide shares a little bit about that.
So there's really 3 tiers we're going to be focused on, and this is an ongoing and continuous process, quite frankly. The first element are some areas that are citywide. There's a fairly consistent theme or things that have broad impact. And we've already identified 3 focus areas. We'll talk about those in the next slide. Our leadership team has taken responsibility for that. So that's the department directors and key leaders. And they're focusing on those and some ideas and strategies to share with our team and get feedback on and then work to implement. There's this area we call joint initiatives. So these are things that are maybe beyond the department, but maybe not quite citywide. We talked about there are 3 departments that scored the lowest overall in the engagement, and that's fire, water, and police in that order, scored lower. And so there's some common themes there. They're large organizations. They work in remote settings. There's a level of isolation at times in that work, whether it's with your team or individually. So how do we provide connection and engagement in those different settings? And so there may be some strategies, some that may be very department specific, but some that may cut across those. And so how do we work with those areas? And so that's an area that sort of falls between citywide and departmental. And then finally, the departmental is by each department, looking at what came out of those specific department related results and what those team members see as important. And that really is going to take shape within what that department values and wants to focus their work on as we move forward. So this next slide takes you to those 3 initial citywide areas of focus. It was really interesting as we broke this out and looked at it. There seemed to be sort of a pairing of a strength with an area of challenge. Just to give you an example, like the area we've called now staff included, but all work meaningful. One of our very highest scoring things was my work is meaningful. People feel value in what they do, which is great. But then there is a disconnect there about, do I feel fully included in what's going on? So how do we work with that? You care about your work, you find it meaningful, but how do we connect you better to the whole? So that's part of that work, and how do you leverage that strength to address that area where you maybe didn't perform as well? The interdepartmental cooperation, again, scored low consistently, but also there's a really high confidence level in my team and in my supervisor. That was the very highest score. So how do we translate your feeling, good feeling and strength of your individual team with how it connects to other teams and what's going on with other areas in the organization, and as you look at senior leadership and how they're connected to that as well. And then finally, recognition and accountability and appreciation. Again, there's a high level of feeling appreciated in your work, but then is there accountability where there needs to be? Is there the appropriate or a good way of recognizing excellent performance or great performance? So those are ones that can complement each other as well. So we have teams working on this. Each of these teams, work groups are headed by one of the assistant city administrators. And so we're generating ideas, going to be working with our team to talk about some of these strategies as we move forward.
All right, so I'm going to share about our next steps. All last month and this month, we have been doing department meetings, individual department meetings, to share the citywide results and then also their department-specific results. I think I have 2 meetings left, so we're near the finish line on that. And then within the next month or so, we will do a brief follow-up survey to ask questions like, did you feel like the process was transparent? Did you get the information that you wanted? Do you actually believe that we're going to act on the feedback that you gave us? Things like that. And then we will likely ask some follow-up questions to those citywide priorities as well. What does recognition mean to you? We do actually have a lot of comments on that already, but we might need to dig in a little bit more in some areas.
And one of the benefits with this survey provider is they give us unlimited use of additional follow-up surveys at no additional cost. So we can drill into a specific topic with our team that may come out of some of the work groups or even within a department and get more refined feedback. So it's a great complementary tool as we move forward.
So then for the next 18 months to 2 years, we'll have an ongoing process to apply and respond to the feedback. We really want to create a culture where we have constant feedback in all directions, up, down, and to the side, and that we are constantly responding to that to perform at our highest. So the citywide priorities, those leadership team committees will be working, and then also departments will be working to address their own priorities. We will likely do a few other adjustments and initiatives. They probably will not be a citywide priority, but they are important. Again, we have many comments with quite a few suggestions in particular areas. For example, a suggestion about benefits. So those comments will be sent to the benefits team to consider, but it's not something that the entire city needs to be focusing on. Oops. And then lastly, we do plan to survey again in 2025. We are a high-performing organization. To be a high-performing organization, you have to be focused on results. So if you want to be focused on results, you have to actually measure them. So we will survey again. Our current plan is 2025. We wanted to give enough time where we could create a strategy and make some meaningful changes, but also do it soon enough that there was still urgency associated with it. So we felt 2 years was kind of the sweet spot for that.
So this is really important, and Jamie said it, we want to be results focused. It's good to get the feedback, but we want to show that we're working on those areas, focus on positive results, get more feedback and build from it. We'll continue to make adjustments as we go. We want to be intentional about working on culture and engagement, and that actually becomes part of our culture, that we work on that, we care about it, and we're engaged in it. I want to specifically thank Jamie for her work on this. This has been a huge undertaking. We kicked it off at the beginning of the year in January. We did a series of what we called team talks, where we had about 20 meetings. We literally met with every employee in one way or another through those meetings, and she was great in supporting that. We've already made adjustments from that and from this survey. Some of it are reflected in the proposed budget. There are other elements and policy that we're working on. So it's already taking root in a number of ways, but it's hard work, and I appreciate Jamie's really excellent support in getting us to this point and helping provide the information that we can build from and work on as we go forward. So glad to open it up for any questions you might have.
Good job, Jamie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, item 4 is ordinance 2023-15, ordinance to rezone 7.2 acres from residential to Plan PD 38.19 for 3,000 district for the property located Franklin Road, South Liberty Pike, the Middle 8 PUD subdivision, and also we'll be talking about the development plan for the same property, and somehow or other we'll slide in the parkland impact fee in that area.
Sounds good. My apologies. I pulled the puck out right before I got up here, so I'll get the map pulled up. But I think we all know what we're talking about. This is the Middle 8 project. I'm just going to talk about some of the key points of the plan and where we are, how we got here. First off, staff has been working with the applicant since July of 2022, when they first brought in their plan to show us. We've been working hard to get them to a point where they meet almost all of the zoning ordinance and all the other city regulations. There was a point where they wanted to explore additional stories on their building, and so they took the proper steps to go ask those questions. So what they did was they went to the Historic Zoning Commission on February 13th, 2023, and they received a preliminary recommendation on the height, massing, and scale that they wanted to propose. Then they went to Planning Commission on March 23rd, 2023, and they were granted special consideration language in the Envision Franklin plan. They proposed an amendment. So they went through those two steps before they brought forward their development plan. Some of the key points about the development plan I want to highlight is the height. That language in Envision Franklin was specific to height. And staff feels that the plan that they propose meets that language of Envision Franklin, that they are contextual to the adjacent building of Jamison Station. The development plan is consistent with the historic zoning application, showing a 30-inch difference between Jamison Station and their proposed building. Another topic that's been discussed throughout the development of this plan is Liberty Pike. We all know that we do not have any future plans for that cross-section of Liberty Pike yet. We discussed it a little yesterday. But the applicant has offered to contribute to the final design, and so we've memorialized that in one of the conditions of approval of this development plan. Another topic, oh, I do got the map up. Sorry. I did. Never mind. There we go. Okay. Sorry for the delay. And the other topic is parking. They are asking for modifications of standards to reduce the multifamily required spaces slightly. They provided a parking study and showed that between the reduction that they're proposing and a share factor based on the peak times of the small commercial space and the multifamily, the number that they're providing meets national standards for needs, as well as they did a study of several multifamily sites in the city to show that the numbers that they're proposing are consistent with occupancy rates and utilization of multifamily in the area. So staff can support the modification of standards request for parking. Lastly, at Planning Commission, it should be noted that Planning Commission did recommend approval of the MOS and the rezoning and the development plan with votes of 6-2. 4-2, I'm sorry, yes, people were absent, sorry. Thank you, Alderman Peterson. There was an applicant, the applicant did bring up a discussion at Planning Commission. They asked to remove conditions number 91 and 92 from the plan. These conditions were put on by staff in relation to the application that was presented at Historic Zoning Commission. Historic Zoning Commission, when they looked at this proposal in relation to height and massing, there was a discussion on how the building was only 30 inches different than Jameson Station. They talked about that a lot. When we were reviewing the development plan, we asked, is there a survey done at Jameson Station? Do we know the actual height of Jameson Station? And that was said, no, we did a approximation, and that's fine. So staff concluded that difference, that discussion difference of 30 inches should be memorialized. So what historic zoning recommended was what the plan will ultimately do. So, condition number 91 is to complete a survey of the height of Jameson Station at site plan, so we know the true height. And then condition 92 is to keep the building 30 inches from whatever that height is. So I can answer any questions about any of that, if you need any questions answered about the project.
Question.
Sure.
Everything I've ever seen from them always said 57 feet.
And it also
So-
said 54 feet 6 inches of Jameson Station. So there was always that
I know.
comparison of the two buildings.
I know.
Okay.
But they couldn't be sure unless they had that condition, the survey done of the building. Everywhere was consistent. I went back and looked at that because people were saying, well, what's that going to be? Is it going to be really 30 inches and everything? And I said, I don't know, but all I know is it's been 57 feet the whole time. So that's what they were asking for. I just want to make that clear that that's always been consistent, correct?
The application has said 57. The application has also said 54 feet 6 inches. And the discussion at the meeting at Historic Zoning referenced a 30-inch difference many, many times. So what Historic Zoning was considering was that there was a 30-inch difference. So that's what we got memorialized because, if there hasn't been a survey done, then we can't say for certain what Jameson Station was. So if the only correlation is that there would be a 30-inch difference, then that's what was considered.
And what if it's not 30 inches? What happens?
Then they don't meet the condition of approval
for the zoning. for the
Right.
zoning.
So because I don't know what Jameson Station height is. They could have done a survey and then we could have talked about that, like, oh, well, it's actually 52 feet or it's actually 57 feet. Then we can compare it and talk it through, well, how tall should this building be? But without that number, we were talking about a difference of heights, not one height to another.
And I think when I studied all this, the height of 57 was because of trying to do the penthouses so they could do the studio, and also meet the market at 9 feet. Because those,
And if there's a rationale for why 57 is needed, I think the path is that they go back to historic zoning to speak to that recommendation in terms of 57 feet. And then we can keep going with it.
Mayor, does the resolution that was passed by historic zoning anywhere mention 30 inches? Does the actual official resolution that was voted on and passed, does it mention 30 inches in the resolution?
There's not a resolution.
Or
with a
they had to vote on, they
recommendation.
had to make a motion.
So the submittal documentation that was submitted for them to make their preliminary recommendation had certain information on it. If that information is incorrect,
Well, but no, well, there is an official, well, they're sending a recommendation based off of, there's no document, I mean, because
So maybe to answer
they
your
do not
question.
do a resolution. No, they make a preliminary recommendation. to
where
the
is
planning
30
commission.
inches written in an official document that they
It's written
approved?
where they say
Well,
54
it was in a
feet
power,
6.
it was in a
and-
PowerPoint presentation, but where was it in, that was in the PowerPoint.
The
their
30
PowerPoint.
No.
inches is not, but there
The
is
30 inches is-
54 feet, 6 inches
Talking about another
documented
building.
for Jamison Station. And then if you go back to the minutes, much of the discussion was related to the comparison of the two building heights. So the important part of the process is that the COA ultimately has to be given by the Historic Zoning Commission. So it really procedurally needs to happen that their preliminary recommendation is what's being considered through this process as it moves to Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So we just want to make sure that everybody's reviewing the same information. And if that building is not 54 feet, 6 inches, then it needs to go back to Historic Zoning Commission for a recommendation that's based on the accurate information.
54, 60, Jameson Station.
Right. That is our normal procedure. That is just our normal procedure. I'm just the messenger.
And I understand. I think the frustrating part, and are we talking building height or elevation?
Building height.
Building height.
Because it's different.
No.
Yes. Elevation is different than building
From
height.
grade, building height from grade,
Were we talking building height from grade or elevation?
from grade.
No, from grade to the top of the building.
Yes, it was
Yes.
understood that it was building height.
That's the building height.
But that could be different. I mean, you're actually talking about the height from one building to another building is what you're talking, is what this 30 inches is. It is the difference between the parapet of one to the top of another.
Okay, yeah, yes, that's what you're saying.
See what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's very confusing. It's confusing the public, it's confusing to us, quite frankly, confusing the applicant. And we're talking about 30 inches, and the difference, I think, maybe they'll present, I'm just looking here at the thing, and we're talking about 1.5 foot difference, probably. I
Well,
don't know, they
that's the
could talk to us.
question is that
And
was
so then-
probably,
No,
and
I
not to
agree,
interrupt
I
you, but
agree. I
that
don't
was the
like-
question is that if something was presented without true documentation, no one has told us yet what the height of Jameson Station is. Historic zoning is trying to figure out if what they're proposing is contextual. So we're using a comparison number. If we had the height of Jameson Station, I think this could be a very easy discussion to say, oh, okay, it's 54.8. Okay, well, that's still close enough. But we don't have that number, so staff is bound to just try to understand how do we put that comparison and that recommendation into the documents.
And don't take my comments as anything targeted at staff. It is frustrating to have I think it's frustrating for everyone. So we should look at our processes as well in the future. And if you see this happening in another situation, like we better, like let's, I don't know if that can go into our submittal rules, but
Mr. Mayor,
this is unfortunate.
can I just ask a question?
Sure.
They're talking about
92 or 91 requirements. Where are those listed?
It's the condition of approval number. So while there's,
And so where can we see them?
they should be an attachment on, I can try to get to it if I can get out of presentation mode. So the conditions of approval.
Well, I looked at that, but I didn't see them.
So let me scroll down. So even though there's not 92 conditions, we number them and then they fall away as we review things and they compile things. So there's 92 right there. So this is asking.
They're not listed 92 of them.
They're not right in numerical order. No,
Let me ask, were you finished with your presentation?
I'm finished.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Tell us about measuring Jameson Station. I think that's the question. Do we need a tape measure? I've got one in my car.
We brought a tape measure, but my name is Gary Vogan with Kaiser Vogan Design. We're the land planners, landscape architects on the team. I have Joan Antunovich, the architect here. Thank you for your time. We have Miss Amanda McKeon, the developer of Truland. We were gonna keep it to a 10-minute presentation, but we can kind of dumb this down to keep it simple. Simplify. We'll simplify. So we actually, when we first did this project, we always talked about the transition of Franklin Road to Daniels Drive to Jameson Station and its relation to the factory. We always promoted diversity and preservation of density and building and infrastructure adjacent to the site. But really building off the streetscape of Franklin that's been developed, the walkability of the downtown, the diversity of housing we're promoting, all those elements as part of the master plan and Vision Franklin. Those are all in alignment. We agree with Amy that we'd like to strike comment number 91 because we have surveyed the building of Jameson Station. And we have measured that at 52.75 feet as opposed to 54.6, I think it was. 52 foot 9 inches, put it in layman's terms. So we are, as we mentioned in historic zoning, we mentioned 30 inches and could be within 10%. So we are going towards that within 10% to be compatible with Jameson Station. So that's the request we were going to talk to you about, in particular to the development plan. I can have Mr. Antunovich speak to that also. We've measured other buildings within the city of Franklin as well, just to gauge that temperature relationship of elevation. So you all can have that. Did Angie pass that little packet around, please? If you could pass. Okay, thank you. So this is just an exhibit that Joe's going to speak to talk about the building height. As we mentioned, and Amy and Emily have mentioned, the building is 57 feet for the proposed building within Middle 8. Jameson Station is 52 feet 9 inches. We're going to show other buildings that are similar to that in relationship and even taller than what we're proposing in Middle 8 as well. So hopefully that clears up the height of, we actually surveyed Jameson Station amongst other buildings in the city of Franklin that's in this little packet that Angie's passing around. Just so you can show comparison and things of that nature. And we know and realize we have to go back to historic zoning. That's part of the process. We have to go for a final certificate of appropriateness during site plan. So their next stop after, hopefully, we move forward with Mayor and Board of Aldermen. So that would be the next step, Historic Zoning Commission. Talk the same discussion with them and work with them on that. It was very collaborative, so we're looking forward to that. But our first step is before you all for first, second, and third reading. But Joe, if you don't mind, take it away about the building architecture, and he's going to relate some of the buildings in the plans there.
Thank you, Gary. I'm Joe Antunovich. I'm the CEO of Antunovich Associates. We have our main office in Chicago and offices around the country. We have designed award-winning projects in Charleston, Georgetown, Greenville, South Carolina, Lincoln Park, Chicago, all communities that take meticulous care of their built environment and their history, much like your community does. And I must compliment you all for really this discussion and what you do to protect your history and to protect your environment here. You're doing a fabulous job in that protection of what you have. We've worked closely with, as has been mentioned, with Franklin's Historic Zoning Commission to design a world-class building. A building that Franklin will be immensely proud of on this very special 7.2 acre site. Our collaboration with the Historic Zoning Commission has resulted in a development that parks 400 cars below grade.
Are you going to get to the height,
Yes,
please?
that allows us to make the building lower. It enables all of the parking to be removed from the surface of the 7.2 acres, and thus we're allowed to have then almost 40% of open space so that all of Franklin can come and enjoy our courtyards, our plazas, our setbacks, and our bucolic environment. Our two main buildings are 36 feet high, a 3-story building from Liberty Pike, and one building, only one building of almost 30 buildings that we're building. Around the perimeter, we basically have residential buildings of 2.5 stories tall, and they're only 30 feet high. We step back to these two buildings, one that's 36 feet and one that's 57 feet high. We have asked at Historic Zoning, and we've been consistent on that we need 57 feet for the height of that building to be 5 stories to accommodate the program that our client wishes to put there. We have actually measured, and you can see in the handout that we've given you, an as-built survey of Jameson Station. We estimated that the height of Jameson Station was to be 54'6". Our building is 57 feet, the building that we had approved by Historic Zoning, a 30-inch difference. We sent 2 separate surveyors out there, and we found that Jameson Station has a height of 52'9". So we were off by 21 inches. So instead of it being a 30-inch difference in height, it's actually a 51-inch difference in height. Now this tabletop is 30 inches.
4.25 feet difference.
This tabletop.
4.25 feet difference.
So the tabletop is, 29.5 inches. The top of my tape is 51 inches. That's the difference in height. That's the difference in height between the height of our building at 57 feet and the height of Jameson Station at 52 feet 9. And that's really what we're asking for. We're asking for that building, in order for it to be built at 5 stories, we need that building to be 57 feet tall so that it can have 9-foot ceilings, so that it can be competitive in the marketplace, and it can match the quality of building that we promised our client and what we promised the city of Franklin. We went around, we not only measured Franklin Station, we actually went out and measured several other buildings, because there's been a lot of discussion about building height. So if you go into page number 4 in the handout that we have, you'll see a number of familiar buildings in this survey that we did. The brownstones, the beautiful brownstones that were constructed, are 51 feet high. The Harpeth Hotel is in places over 60 feet tall. 60 feet that we measured. The grain elevators are 80 feet tall and go as high as 112 feet. The upper part of the Horizon Bank building is 60 feet high. The upper part of the Landmark Community Bank is 67 feet 1 inches above the ground. The factory water tower is 117 feet tall and 78 feet tall to the bottom of the upper drum. The factory chimney is 128 feet tall. Our building number 2 is 57 feet high, and we've consistently asked from historic zoning, all of our documentation that we have submitted as part of the Plan Commission approval documents that building as 57 feet tall and 5 stories. One of several buildings that we're building on the site. We are very sensitive to how we've planned the building with our neighbors. Our topography drops off. But along the backside of our property is an excellent line of tall trees. We've been asked to measure the height of the tall trees. The tall trees vary between 40 feet and 80 feet. Some of the trees on our back property line are 80 feet. And if you look at the drawing on page number 6, you'll indicate a section where we show the average location of the houses along Old Liberty Pike in comparison to where our building would be located. Those houses are almost 280 feet away at the closest point, except for one house, and 320 feet away from building number 3, our lower building. So there's a substantial setback from our taller buildings to the residences and a substantial tree line that will exist between their homes and our buildings. So what we're asking you for is approval to build a 57-foot high building as one of our buildings within our development. You can see from the plan, not how Jamison Station is planned, where the building is up on the street, hard on the street, only 21 feet back from the curb line. But you can see how our buildings have these recessed courts, these recessed plazas, these recessed areas, which can be enjoyed by everyone here in Franklin. So we're asking you to approve, and given the commitment that we've made to park 400 cars below grade, given our commitment to design what we believe is a world-class building, a world-class piece of architecture, we're asking, as called for in the revised Envision Franklin text for our site, where these factors can be made to contribute to allowing additional height on our site, that we be approved to have 57 feet for our special building on the special site.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. I've got 2 people who want to speak, and I know the board's going to have questions. So I'm going to ask Tom Bell, and also we have Tyra Sturgis from the Heritage Foundation who wants to speak. So if you'll come to the podium, and you have 2 minutes each. There, if you would. Otherwise, I won't have to extract people. Tom.
Thomas Bell, 177 Lancaster Drive, part of the 170-plus individuals for Stop the Middle Eight. Not all 175 decided to come tonight, but the issue is the height. They've promised time and time again that it's 30 inches. Their own words, 30 inches. Constantly a sales job. I'm glad you brought up the height of the tower as well as the smokestack. They're both 2 things that the people on Old Liberty Pike will not see because your 6-story building will be in front of it. So I understand, and we think that the Historic Zoning Commission erred in their decision rendering you the opportunity to build a 5-story building, 6-story building on that site by only looking at the overlay that's on Liberty Pike. rather the overlay on Franklin Road, not Liberty Pike where the property runs along. So to just say now, you were saying 57 feet, you've been telling the neighbors, the 175 concerned citizens, 30 inches. Now you come before us once again with about, comparable, comparable, when it comes down to 52, 9 inches. That's what we've been complaining about all along, about there's a lot of fuzziness. So 30 inches was out of your mouth multiple times. And we'd like to hold you and the rest of the committees to that height. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Tyrus Sturgis, representing the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County. For nearly 6 years, Franklin's focus on historic preservation has remained rooted in our sense of community, which is tied to place and people. Franklin has a strong preservation constituency that works in partnership with many in our community to protect irreplaceable historic places. With that in mind, the Heritage Foundation commends the intentionality for creating a space that can bring people together from all walks of life. However, given the historic nature of the property and the areas around it, how will this property and its intangible cultural heritage be remembered in this space? With that same intentionality, we highly recommend the developers of the Middle 8 project to consider all heights and massing. A multi-story building within a historic space risks nullifying the integrity of Franklin's last remaining green gateway into downtown and is not contextually aligning with the current historic Franklin Road neighborhood. The Franklin Road Gateway is surrounded by historic properties located on the National Register of Historic Places, including Creekside, Daniel McMahon House, Wyatt Hall, Hollinsdale Farm, The Factory, Roper's Knob, and the historic Truett House. This gateway could be altered forever by this project and set a precedent for similar projects in the future. To ensure preservation of resources tied to the cultural landscape of this property, we highly recommend ground-penetrating radar and an archaeological survey. With the historic Truett House tied not only to the Battle of Franklin, but also occupation during the Civil War, erasure of any resources contained within the ground will leave a lasting impact on future research, preservation of the cultural landscape, and an opportunity to tell Franklin's whole story. Environmentally, flooding concerns due to the potential loss of a natural buffer landscape must be addressed, especially for the current residents of this historic and surrounding neighborhoods.
You'll finish up, please.
Yes, sir. While the foundation supports smart, well-planned growth, we also support the preservation of historic places tied to architecture and the cultural character of Franklin and Williamson County. As such, the Heritage Foundation requests a primary seat at the table with not only the developers of the Middle 8 project, but all potential developers and city officials to fully collaborate and engage in best practices for preserving our historic places, green spaces, and gateways. Thus, we can help ensure the vibrancy
You'll
and
finish up,
viability
please.
here.
I
and in
said
the
finish
future.
up, please.
Thank you.
Anything we need to get here on this?
Item 7's on both agendas, but we can talk about it there. Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time. We'll need to bring this back again because there's just not enough time to continue to address the questions and that the board's going to have and that each of us have.
Well, there's a lot of things that I'd like to ask about.
Is our agenda for the voting meeting fairly light?
Got a lot of public hearings, which may or may not make.
I don't think that, here, and then this is totally related, but this is related to your question. I don't think we need to be mucking around with the board meeting itself. That is set by charter, agreed to by the state
Understood.
legislature, and you do not want to do too much to that.
But let us work on including this on another agenda.
Yeah, well,
And-
you're not even voting on first reading tonight. You don't
Correct.
do that till next meeting. We can incorporate some time in the work session to allow for more discussion in 2 weeks. Yeah, we may need to look at if we need to add a little time to that meeting as well, just to see what else we've got for you. But you do have the luxury of you're not voting tonight on it.
Well, understood, but I would venture to say a lot of us had a number of concerns and things that we wanted to bring up. I mean, you understand the issue, but could we bring it up in the next in the voting meeting as a special item at the end of the agenda?
It's not on your
I don't-
agenda?
It's not on the agenda,
Yeah.
so I wouldn't support that. We'll bring it back in 2 weeks. But I think we all have a lot of questions and comments and how that relates. So,
They won't be answered before we vote the next time. I know there's no way around it, but maybe there is. It's frustrating, especially after we hear a new group that comes in and
Right.
says, we have no chance to respond or anything.
We don't. And
It's
we-
fine, we'll move on. I apologize
But
for
we also have
taking too much
somebody
time.
fly people in here to give presentations, and now, I'm sorry, I don't like that. I have no control over it.
No, we thank you for your time. It's just really, we want to hold the building at 57 feet, and we're within 10% of the Jameson Station. That's all we're asking. So,
Okay.
thank you.
we're over. We'll see you in a few minutes.